Welcome to this Java Break with Basis. Today's topic is offering Pro5 and BBJ Code as a web service. In this session we're going to look at both creating and consuming web services in Pro5 or BBJ. So let's cover the agenda that we'll follow in today's session. Firstly, we're going to have a look at an iPhone app consuming a Pro5 and a BBJ web service. And then we'll talk about what web services are. Then we'll look at consuming a web service from BBJ and from Pro5 or Visual Pro5. And then we'll explain how we did that. And then we'll look at the other end of the web services paradigm, the offering of a web service. And then we'll take your questions at the end of the session. So here we are with the ubiquitous iPhone screen. We've got an iPhone application that's been written to consume a Pro5 web service. Let me hand off to Nick Decker, our engineering supervisor, who will take you through a demonstration of both a Pro5 and a BBJ web service being consumed by an iPhone.
One of the new features in BBJ 10 is the ability to take an existing BBX application and publish it as a web service with very little effort. We've got a couple of web consumer applications that are written for the iPhone that take advantage of this new capability. The first one is based off of the Chili Company ordering system demo program that's available with the nightly downloads. I first run the iPhone application and am prompted for a name and a password. I also have to put the host in there, which is the server that the web server is running on. After completing the information, I can click on the Connect button. And I'm now presented with a list of options provided by the web service, which is my BBJ program running on my remote server. It allows me to browse a list of customers, check out my warehouse inventory, or even view my products. For example, to view the inventory for my main warehouse, I just click or tap on the button. Then I can scroll through all of the entries for that warehouse. Likewise, I can take a look at all of my products and scroll through those. Because this is a native iPhone application that consumes my BBJ web service, it looks and acts just like every other iPhone program with the typical user interface. We've written another program that is also a native iPhone application that'll do a lookup for a customer balance for the Chili Company. I first have to configure the remote server. After selecting the server, I'm now able to do an inquiry based off of a customer number. So for example, I can type in the customer number 3 and check their balance, and their current balance is $48.20. I can type in another customer number such as 10, and as soon as I click the check balance, it'll contact the web server, which will run a Pro5 program. It's only about 6 or 7 lines of code. It opens up the Chili Company file, does a read record, finds out the customer balance, and sends it back to my client. After clicking the button, you can see that they have a current balance of $19.98, and my application indicates the timestamp when the balance was last checked.
Let's talk a bit about web services. What are web services? We've seen them in action. We've seen a Pro5 and a BBJ web service in action. But let's talk about what they are. Web services represent the new application integration paradigm. In the old world, you used to write very brittle code that might have, for example, taken data off of a website. As soon as that website changed, your integration broke. So it is a very brittle interface. With web services, we don't have that brittleness any longer. We're able to write robust application integration points. So it delivers a programming language and protocol independent way of integrating applications to each other. Web services are natively supported by Java, J2EE, and Microsoft.NET. And given that BBJ is built on top of Java, it makes it very easy for both BBJ and Pro5 to be able to both offer and consume web services. The communication protocol is from XML output, and it's independent of the client application language. It's no longer necessary for the client application language to even know what the web service might have been written in, or the web service provider doesn't have to care about which application language is going to be used to consume his web service. It can be used by any client application on any platform. We've just shown you the example of consuming a Pro5 delivered piece of business logic inside of an iPhone application. It is the magic ingredient for seamless application integration. So let's get you started. Let's talk a little bit about the background terminology, the 3-letter acronyms, or in this case 4-letter acronyms, that make up some web services terminology. On the server side, we talk about offering the service. In other words, you the provider of the information that's been requested by the client. The web services description language describes the methodology of delivering that information and what information would be required. So the WSDL, as it's called, is necessary to describe your web service. And thereafter we utilize UDDI, Universal Description, Discovery and Integration, to make those touch points between the client and the server operate. You can run programs written in Java, in BBJ, in VB, in C, in C#, C++, Pro5, etc. Let's talk about the client side. On the client side, we're consuming the service. We're consuming the service that's been offered up by the server. We use language-specific generated program stubs, and those are derived from the WSDL. It transparently calls programs on the server side and can be written in many languages, including BBJ. And therefore, it's callable by Pro5. In the next release of Pro5, Rev 10, we'll be able to call BBJ code in much the same way that you would call a Pro5 program. And that gives us the capability of consuming a web service very simply from within Pro5 or Visual Pro5 code. Let's look further at the terminology. On the communication layer, we talk about the fact that the data is transmitted in XML format. It uses the SOAP protocol, Simple Object Access Protocol, and it utilizes the transportation layers of HTTP and TCP/IP. And the web services protocol stack, UDDI servers register and discover the web services, and the WSDL file describes the web service that's been offered up by the server. Applications use SOAP to request the web service, and SOAP messages are transported as XML over HTTP and TCP/IP. But enough jargon. None of this is really important to you. What we'd really like to show you is how to employ these capabilities that are offered up by BBJ and by Java. So let's look at some of the diagrams that show off the functionality that we're looking for. So over here we have the internet, and on the left we'll have web service provider, could be written in BBJ or Pro5, and it's offering up a web service to be consumed via C# or .NET, consumed via BBJ or Pro5, or consumed by Visual Basic, or consumed via Java, or consumed via Perl. So those are just some examples of how the web services can be consumed across the internet. The other example may be of consuming a web service offered by a third-party provider. We could have an internal web service provider. Over here on the top, we have a BBJ or Pro5 web service being provided and consumed on the right-hand side by a web services consumer in BBJ or Visual Pro5 GUI. In the character world, can be consumed by BBJ or Pro5 CUI. And then the web service has been offered up. On the left, we have some examples, UPS, FedEx, tracking, and that's the example we'll look at in a minute. So let's have a look at that. We're going to consume a FedEx package tracking web service. Now this is available to you in the downloads. If you check the box for demos, you'll get the fully fledged FedEx package tracking web service written in BBJ, the consumption thereof written in BBJ. This will demonstrate the ability to pass a tracking number to the package tracking web service and receive detailed information on the shipment. It provides different data access methods that websites would offer by providing an interactive programmatic lookup procedure. Requires very minimal programming to interact with the web service. So let's have a look at that in action. So let's look at the consumption of web services with BBJ and with Pro 5. If you've checked the demos box when you downloaded BBJ, you'll have access to the BBJ Launch Dock, which is a utility to create an application launcher. And the default one that ships comes with several demonstration programs. Amongst them is the consumption of the BBJ package, or consumption of the package tracking service from BBJ, both a GUI and a CUI version. Let's have a look at those in action. So across here I have a character user interface for package tracking, and there's a CUI application written in BBJ. I'll use F3 to populate some sample tracking numbers and F1 to track them. And that'll consume the FedEx tracking service, package tracking service, and populate the information to my screen. Let me F4 to exit that and show you the same sort of logic in the GUI version. So our GUI package tracking, we can check the checkbox for using sample data and click the button for tracking. And again, this consumes the web service, goes out across the internet, and we don't care about what language that web service is written in, as long as we understand the consumption of the WSDL, and we can create the Java stubs and consume them within BBJ, we can consume that web service. Well, that's all well and good. Now you've seen these items and you'll have these available to you with your checking of the demos and downloading the demos. This is the piece that you won't have. This is new functionality that's available in BBJ, and rather in Pro 5 and Visual Pro 5 Rev 10, and be supported by BBJ 10. And that's the ability to call BBJ code from Visual Pro 5 or Pro 5 code. Let's have a look at that in action. So maybe you've got your production system in Pro 5 and you're not quite ready to make that next step to go to BBJ, but you want to be able to consume a web service. BBJ is your easiest way to get there, and you can simply utilize the xcall, which is very similar to the call syntax, to be able to xcall BBJ code. So let's have a look at CUI package tracking. We actually took that BBJ CUI program, we backported it to Visual Pro 5, and again that Visual Pro 5 code will run unchanged in a green screen Pro 5 application. And again we'll do the F3 to use the sample data, and we'll do F1 to track. And that's executed the call to xcall to BBJ and consumed the package tracking web service. So let's have a look at that underlying code. What I'm going to do is go back to my launch dock and let's backtrack up the menu and let's look at the development tools and let's launch the IDE, and let's look at some of that source code that we've used in Pro 5 to be able to consume the package tracking service in BBJ. So if I double click on CUI Pack Track Pro 5, that'll launch the Pro 5 program. Let's just scroll down here and find the magical xcall verb. Alright, I'm not sure where the xcall verb is, so let's just do the good old Control F to find it. And there it is. So let's have a look at that. Let's highlight that line. So as you might have expected, looks very similar to our call verb. We call in the program name and we give in it an entry point, that's a label within the xpacktrack.bbj, and we're going to pass along some information, package information. We'll pass it the tracking info and we'll get that back out of that same string. Now when we release xcall, it'll also support other data types like arrays, so look out for that. We'll let you know when it's available for you to look at. So there we've seen an example of consuming a web service from BBJ, and then we've taken it a step further. We've consumed that same web service utilizing Pro 5's capability of xcalling BBJ code. So with minimalistic code in BBJ Pro5 is able to X-call the BBJ code, which does the heavy lifting of interfacing with the web service. So this is what it would look like. You have the X-call verb that allows interaction between Pro5 and BBJ. We have a Pro5 terminal emulation session or terminal session, a green screen. And on the server side, it can do an X-call much the same way as the old call verb. An X-call verb can pass data across to the BBJ program and receive a response from the BBJ program. And in the BBJ program, we do the web services consumption. So a very simple interface, a very simple example. So how did we do that? Well, firstly, Java natively supports web services, as we mentioned earlier. And of course, BBJ can execute Java. And Pro5 and Visual Pro5 can now call BBJ and share data. You have some choices to make which aspect of the basis product set will control access to the data. So Pro5 type data controlled by Pro5 would need to have shared file locking set, or BBJ would need to access the data via the Pro5 data server. Or your other choice would be to have the basis database management system control access to the data. That'll give you access to the superset of data types. And then your Pro5 would access the data through the BBJ P5 data server. So what are the steps we took? Firstly, we got the WSDL from the web services provider. We applied the Java tools to generate the Java stubs. And we added the Java classes to the class path in BBJ services. And we used those methods provided by the web service in the BBJ applications to be able to consume the web service. If you want to see more about this and read more about it, have a look at a past Advantage magazine article on package tracking under the language section of the index of articles. And there we clearly explain the various steps and give you the syntax utilized to take these 4 simple steps to be able to consume a web service from within a BBJ application. The extra step we took for Pro5 or Visual Pro5 is that we X-called the BBJ code from within our Pro5 character-based application, or if it were GUI, from a Visual Pro5 GUI application. What about offering a web service? We saw that early on. We saw us offering up a web service to the iPhone consumer. But let's talk about the steps that we took to make that happen. Firstly, we took existing business logic, or we wrote some new business logic in BBJ or Pro5. In our case, we took some Pro5 business logic. If it's Pro5, we need to ensure that the Pro5 code can be run in BBJ, because BBJ will actually be offering up the web service on behalf of Pro5. We then again choose our data access and ensure that Pro5 and BBJ are using the same data access. We then would use Enterprise Manager to add the code as a web service and publish that code. And then lastly, we'll need to pass on that WSDL to the consumer so that the consumer, again, be it something written in BBJ or Pro5 or some third-party language, can consume the web service. In our case, we pass that on to our tame iPhone developer. Let's look at the underlying Pro5 code and see how complex or how simple it is to offer it up as a web service. To look at that code consumed by the iPhone app, we'll go back to our launch dock and let's select Development Tools, load up the IDE, and let's look at that Pro5 source code. We see that it's Pro5 tokenized code. This little red C tells me it's compiled or tokenized. And there it's very simple. There are line numbers. We've got a label get cbal, and we enter a customer number and we pass back the balance. We've got an IO list to the ART01 file. This is a add-on software transaction data file. We need to populate the key, and then we're going to do a read with the IO list, and every time we encounter the matching customer number, we're going to accumulate the outstanding invoice amount. And when we finish, we return that value to the BAL. So very simple, very straightforward, exactly the same Pro5 code that you might be familiar with. And this could be Pro5 code that's currently used by Pro5 and can also be run by BBJ, because BBJ can run tokenized Pro5 code. So there it is, a very simple, very straightforward piece of Pro5 business logic pre-existing as you can see from the age of the code with the IO lists. Well, having looked at the code, it's not particularly complex, but how do we go about offering that as a web service? Well, Enterprise Manager comes to the rescue. We now have in BBJ 10 the new web service configuration, and this is a wizard that'll take you through the offering, the creation of a new service, the ability to edit the service, and to publish that service and make it available through the built-in Jetty web server that ships with BBJ services to offer up a web service. In our case, a Pro 5 bit of tokenized code is going to be offered up as a web service. Let me hand off to Jason to take us through the steps of configuring this within the Enterprise Manager.
Enterprise Manager allows us to configure web services. We've installed the demos, so we have both the basis update service as well as the Chili Company ordering service. Today, we're going to create a new service called Balance. We may specify both a working directory as well as a configuration file to use when running our web service. When you see namespace, you might think BBJ namespace, but actually this namespace is specific to web services. When a client consumes web services, they may need to get customer balances from many different locations. By providing a namespace, we help them organize their code by reminding them that this get balance is for the BBJ demo. The next step is to actually add the method to the web service. The name is the name that's published and visible to the entire world. The call is the call to the label that we need to make to actually get the customer balance. So we have a program called balance, or called accounts.bbx, and accounts.bbx has a label getCBal. We know that this label, the enter after following this label requires two arguments. One is the customer ID as a string, as well as the balance, the customer balance that we wish to look up. In BBX and BBJ, when we call a program, we pass as many arguments as we like. The called program is free to change those arguments and return them to us. In a web service, we're only allowed to return one value back to the client. Return index lets us select which value we would like to return. So here on our method, we've given it a name that is the global name that anyone who consumes the web service will use. We've given it the call with both the program name as well as the entry point, the label to enter. We've given it the parameters to the call as well as the types of the parameters. And here at the bottom we've got some reference information. If you were to call this program normally, your calling program would generate code that looks pretty much just like this. We'd like to call accounts.bbx at the getCBal label. We're going to pass in the customer ID, and we expect getCBal to populate the balance for us. The generated Java call can be useful to give to your iPhone developer, to give them a sense of this is what the API looks like. We're going to give you a name called getCustomerBalance. It's going to take a string, that is the customer ID, and it's going to return to you a number. Now that we've created our method and we've completed our web service configuration, we're going to go ahead, select our balance demo, and publish it. Now that the WSDL file is published, we can visit that file, and we'll see that it's a large XML file that's intended for tools to use. But because it's XML, we can get some hints about what's going on. We see both our namespace, BBJ demo, as well as the customer balance, getCustomerBalance, the name of the method that we're providing to the world. The WSDL file is what you provide to people who want to use your web service. So this URL is what you're going to give to your iPhone developer. Thank you very much. I'm going to give it back to Nico now.
So let's summarize what we've covered today. We've looked at an iPhone consuming a Pro 5 app and a BBJ app via the web services paradigm. We spoke a little bit about what web services are. We touched on all the nice terminology, the 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms that make up the buzzwords for web services. We looked at consuming a web service. We demonstrated that from BBJ in a GUI paradigm, from Pro 5, and of course we could do that from Visual Pro 5. Then we spoke about how that was possible. How did we make that possible? Which tools do we use to make that possible? And then we looked at how we went about offering up that web service that the iPhone app was consuming. Now, before we go into questions and answers, I want to remind you of some that are coming up. The next Java break, we have triggers to facilitate easy upgrades. That's coming up on April 21st. Same time, same place. And I want to remind you of some upcoming training. We have the Barista RAD framework, Rapid Application Development Framework. That is a 3-day training class starting on April 12, and then going through to April 14, April 16. Gives you opportunity to catch up on your workload in between. Doesn't take you away from your workday. All of that is web-based training. And then we also have an administration and deployment class, a 1-day class on April 20th. And we'll take you through some of the capabilities, the options that you have in deploying your BBJ application with 3-tier architecture. So we look forward to seeing you at one of those events, upcoming training, or the next Java break. Let's take your questions at this point.